I was 5 years old when I watched my first Godzilla movie. My older brother had spotted Godzilla vs. Gigan on a clearance rack at Kmart and encouraged my mother to buy it, unwittingly planting the seed of a new pop culture obsession in his younger sibling. What precisely drew me to this film so much I can't really determine. That the human protagonist was an artist just like I was? The neat designs of the monsters? The massive scale of destruction? I couldn't tell you, but even after I began to outgrow the likes of the Ninja Turtles and Transformers, my love for the big beast of blue fire only grew hotter. Younger viewers may not remember those old print volumes of TV Guide, containing a week's worth of information that you can now summon with a simple press of a button on your remote. I would scan these grayscale pages each week to see if TNT would be running one of their Godzilla Monster Vision marathons, nagging my mother to purchase blank VHS cassettes so I could record any of the films we didn't already possess. So while Godzilla vs. the Sea Monster, Godzilla vs. Megalon, and Godzilla 1985 were some of the first tapes I had purchased, I had only managed to own copies of Terror of Mechagodzilla, Godzilla vs. Mothra, Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster, and more through the recordings I had grabbed off TNT. Their little promotional music video was also my first introduction to Blue Oyster Cult, long before I had heard Don't Fear the Reaper. I was a pretty active viewer of Godzilla films until I hit high school. At that point, the millennium was turning and VHS was being replaced by DVD. Our VCR was usurped by a DVD player, and that old VHS collection began gathering dust without a device capable of playing them. While I still watched a few select films from my collection, those that I would most often return to were the original 1954 Godzilla and Godzilla 1985, its soft reboot sequel.
A seaboot. A soft seaboot.
It was around here that my love and impression of Godzilla began to shift. I went from enjoying these films as giant wrestling matches with slowed down choreography and obscene costumes to loving the deeper themes running throughout their narrative. So, fast forward to the autumn of 2016, walking out of my second viewing of the highly anticipated Hideaki Anno co-directed Shin Godzilla, and my friend tells me it was a good movie, but it was a bad Godzilla movie. To say that I disagree with him is an understatement. I think Shin Godzilla could, in fact, be the best Godzilla film since the original, and is probably my favorite of the entire franchise. But to explain why, I have to go back and look at past entries in this colossal franchise. The baseline provided by the original film, the standards set and codified by Return of Godzilla, and then to examine how Shin Godzilla adheres to these elements in an exceptional fashion. I'll be thoroughly discussing plot information and details across all three films, so spoiler-averse viewers should beware. In all honesty, I'm not about to tell you much new about a film that has had 65 years to be studied, analyzed, and discussed. Nevertheless, it's important to understand what this film means in order to determine what makes a good Godzilla film. Producer Tomoyuki Tanaka was inspired to create such a monster movie after having viewed The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, his exposure to the film coinciding with the recent tragedy of the Daigo Fukuryu Maru. An American nuclear weapon, named Castle Bravo, was detonated at Bikini Atoll and resulted in the demise of fishermen in the aforementioned boat, inspiring the horrifying opening sequence of Gojira. The creators intentionally wanted to draw parallels between art and reality. From the outset, Godzilla is presented as more than a standard creature feature. It's an attempt to illustrate the terrifying havoc that nuclear power not only can wreak, but was continuing to wreak on the people of Japan. A city in ash and rubble, irradiated victims, and a chilling shot of a woman clutching her crying children while desperately comforting them by claiming they'd be with their father soon. These shots are all a living memory for Japan, a heavy dose of reality that the filmmakers had hoped to inject into an international audience about what Japan had suffered. Unfortunately, many such scenes were edited out for the initial American release, reducing the intended impact. But with closer inspection, it is also possible to see the Japanese concept of wa, a term typically translated in English as a form of social harmony, spread throughout the film. I cannot claim to be an expert on this subject, but my understanding is that maintaining wa is very important in Japanese culture. Within the film of Godzilla, we see the titular titan rise as a threat to this harmony, but it coincides with the disastrous possibilities posed by Dr. Serizawa's oxygen destroyer. Godzilla was a creation of humanity's escalated industrialization and militarization, nature's revenge against human hubris, yet the only way to stop such a monster would be to implement an equally terrifying power. Dr. Serizawa is adamant throughout the film not to let anyone know of the oxygen destroyer's existence, but it soon becomes clear that, well, wa, or harmony, cannot be re-established as long as Godzilla exists. And so, while the oxygen destroyer is used to kill Godzilla, Dr. Serizawa also prevents his invention from falling into the hands of government and military by taking his knowledge, and his life, with the Leviathan's own. It brings to question then if there is something deeper being said by the film regarding nuclear weapons. Do the Japanese believe that, in order to truly maintain harmony, nuclear weapons themselves ought to be abolished? Well, I can't speak for the creators, and therefore shall not assert what philosophy they further wish to communicate with this film. Nevertheless, 30 years after Godzilla's original release, we'd see once more how nuclear power would again threaten to disrupt harmony throughout the world. The Cold War had begun to heat up in the early 1980s between America and the Soviet Union, bringing the fear of nuclear war to the public once more. It reached the point that, in 1982, 1 million protesters had gathered in Central Park, New York City to call an end to the Cold War arms race. In the meantime, for the past several decades, Godzilla had transformed from a horrifying representation of nuclear destruction to a hero of the planet fighting against aliens, pollution, and other broader simplistic threats. The original purpose of the beast had been overwritten as some monster-mashing spectacle. The Showa era would conclude with Terror of Mechagodzilla, a box office failure even in Japan as interest in the Titan waned. Producer Tomoyuki Tanaka would take charge of a multi-year attempt to not only reinvigorate the franchise, but to remind the public of the ruthless destructive power of nuclear weaponry. Special effects director Teruyoshi Tanaka at one point commented that, by the 1980s, the people of Japan had begun to forget the tragic loss and suffering of their own history. This led to Return of Godzilla wiping every prior Godzilla film but the first from canon. It would be a direct sequel and would examine the potential threat of the Cold War from a Japanese perspective. When the mighty radioactive beast once more rears its ferocious head, both the United States and Russia put pressure on the Prime Minister of Japan to kill it with a nuclear weapon. The cinematography intentionally presents the Prime Minister pinned between these two political giants, representing the feeling of the nation caught between both powers during the Cold War. From Japan's perspective, both the United States and Russia have itchy trigger fingers, looking for an excuse to launch and witness the destructive capabilities of their weaponry despite all the rhetoric of defense and deterrence. The rest of the film can be contextualized as Japan taking a firm stance against these great nations, opting to find some manner of solution outside of nuclear weaponry. Once more, there is that element of wa, or harmony, to examine. Just as the original film focused on Dr. Serizawa's conflict in keeping his research secret and needing to save Japan from the Titanic terror, Return of Godzilla focuses on Professor Hayashida and his respect for the creature. While in many ways Godzilla is metaphorically used to represent how the three nations of America, Japan, and Russia all respond to a nuclear threat, he is also represented as a living being, a part of nature separate from the creations of man. Despite his parents having been lost in Godzilla's rampage of 1954, Professor Hayashida has lost his fuel for revenge against the beast. His conflict of harmony is not necessarily about weaponry, but the ability to coexist with this naturally occurring force. Unlike the oxygen destroyer, the man-made weapon of Super X fails to defeat Godzilla. When man tries to conquer nature, it is nature that is victorious. Professor Hayashida instead taps into Godzilla's natural instinct to flock, leading him into a volcano to become trapped and perhaps even killed. In other words, the solution was not in the power of mankind, but in the power of nature to cancel out its own monstrous creation. Nature itself re-establishes wa, or harmony. Just as the first film sought to explore deeper social and political themes throughout the cultural lens of the Japanese, Return of Godzilla wipes away the less serious, less relevant, and more broad themes of the sillier wrestling matches of the Showa era to convey an at the time modern perspective on current world events, simultaneously serving as a warning to how disruptive and destructive such weapons and power can be. With the origin and the attempted reboot, we saw Toho Films do their best to establish Japan's most iconic creation as a serious, high-concept effort to metaphorically address current social and political issues from a Japanese lens. The Heisei and Millennium era would, unfortunately, struggle to retain this sort of exploration. Whether once more addressing environmentalism or Japan's inability to remember and respect its own past, the franchise would revert back to its urban sprawling wrestling ring ways, shelving the creature with Godzilla Final Wars just as they had done with Terror of Mechagodzilla less than 3 decades prior. In 2011, however, Japan would suffer 2 major tragedies that would influence the direction their colossal creation would take. Friday, 11th of March in 2011, a 9-point magnitude earthquake occurred off the coast of Japan that resulted in a catastrophic tsunami. The quake itself triggered the Fukushima Daiichi power plant to shut down its fission reactors, and the tsunami would flood the station and shut down its emergency generators. Over the next several days, this loss of power would result in multiple meltdowns and explosions, increasing the contamination zone even further out from the plant. Shin Godzilla doesn't just draw upon this disaster like the original 1954 film had drawn upon the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki and the tragedy of the Daigo Fukuryu Maru. It heavily critiques the Japanese government's inability to respond sufficiently in the face of such destruction. While many of the sentiments found within the film can be universally shared and understood, it remains rooted in the Japanese perspective. It is at this point I feel concepts like, and forgive my pronunciation, honne, tatemai, and giri could serve to better understand its underlying narrative themes. The easiest way to summarize these words is the personal self, the public self, and the burden of duty or obligation. While these concepts have Western parallels, our culture is far more focused on the individual as opposed to Japan's emphasis on wa, and therefore communal harmony. To summarize, you are expected to suppress your true feelings, beliefs, and self, your honne, in order to maintain the harmony of those around you, avoid rocking the boat, and better serve your employer. Show a good tatemai, public self, to preserve giri, duty and obligation, which in turn maintains wa, or harmony. We can see this manifest very early on as our protagonist, Rando Yaguchi, is told by his friend and senior, Hideki Akasaka, that he should effectively keep quiet, fall in line, and keep outrageous claims to himself. This begins the growing trend we'll see in Shin Godzilla of those that violate tatemai being the ones that get things done. When Yaguchi proposes that the disaster occurring is due to a living organism, he isn't perceived as a mockery by his peers as Western media would portray. He is instead perceived as making a mockery of his fellow staff members. While in Western or Japanese culture, failing to toe the line is a risk to one's career, there are very subtle differences as to why that is between the two. Over time, we are introduced not only to Hiromi Ogashira, the first to declare that the creature will be able to make landfall despite expert opinion claiming otherwise, but a whole team of boat shakers, misfits, and, as the film itself declares, academic heretics. People known for failing to fall in line with what is largely accepted. It's only once we've really established the government these characters fail to fit into that we can better theorize what's being said between the lines. Seeing politicians argue and debate in Western media is common, and our real-world politicians are certainly ones to promise action, but the manner in which all of the old guard in Shin Godzilla pass the buck or save face is on a whole new level. Everyone is scared of saying the wrong thing, making a bad call, and suffering repercussions. New meetings must be established in new boardrooms despite each one containing the same people. There's more dedication to guidelines, form, and legalism than there is to actually solving the problem. That is why Godzilla is able to rain so much destruction with so little timely response from the government. It's why the Prime Minister fails to fire upon the creature, fearing what potential collateral damage will do to his career. Even the confirmation to fire comes from a lengthy line of superiors seeking permission until it reaches the top. No individual decision, just a series of cogs afraid of disrupting the machine, terrified of the consequences their decision could bring. This doesn't stop at the top, as the Prime Minister is perhaps most terrified of guessing or deciding wrong and suffering the fallout. Additionally curious is Shin Godzilla's perspective on Western relations. On one hand, the Japanese bureaucrats are criticized for being too easily pushed around by foreign governments, namely the Americans. At the same time, I believe Kyoko Ann Peterson, an American politician of Japanese heritage, is intended to reflect the nature of the Western world as a meritocracy. With few exceptions, just about every politician in the Japanese government is an older male. Kyoko, on the other hand, is a young woman already acting in a pretty prominent role in the American government. She gets along with Yaguchi because, as an American, she's not beholden to concepts such as honne and tatemai. She's a politician through and through, but you get a sense that what she shows is largely who she is, even if she's holding some cards close to her chest. I wouldn't be shocked if Anno's intention for her request to drop honorifics wasn't due to American ignorance, but more to make a point. In this environment, there is no traditional hierarchy, a point made when the disaster administration was created. Everyone on the team is equal, and in such an organization, what point do honorifics have? There's a lot of criticism verbally spoken towards the nature of post-war Japan and how it was developed, and I believe literally wiping out a hierarchical government that arose from the post-war era and replacing it with a hierarchy-free task force could be Anno's way of bluntly communicating his desire for Japan's future. So while, like the original Godzilla and Return of Godzilla, there's enough material to reach a broad international audience, the film shares a distinctly Japanese perspective like those films had. It is politically and socially relevant to the country's recent events, and it is using Godzilla to represent very specific ideas. While there are traces of the fear of nuclear power and environmental responsibility, what sets Shin Godzilla apart is his representation of the terrifying and ever-changing power of nature. What may seem to many old fans to be a sacrilegious evolution of the creature from dopey-looking kaiju Pokemon to the otherworldly monstrosity more in touch with the beast we know and love is an intentional choice to represent the ever-evolving and unpredictable nature of natural disasters. We see Godzilla press up against a building and collapse it while a family remains inside, unable to evacuate in time. This is a reflection of the few minutes residents of Sendai had to prepare for and evacuate from the tsunami that resulted in over 19,000 deaths in March of 2011. Using a film to visually illustrate the destruction and loss suffered by Japan during a major tragedy? Now where have I seen that before? What really propels Shin Godzilla to my favorite film featuring the titular beast is its very direction though. You can have the best written script and story, but a poor director and editor can cause it to feel listless and tedious. Co-directors Hideaki Anno and Shinji Higuchi, both former Gainax employees that have a long history of working together and on their own separate projects, reunited to deliver a film that's not only visually stunning for a Godzilla film, but perhaps one of the best, if not the best, directed films I've seen in years. If there can be movement in a scene, Hideaki Anno capitalizes on it. You get a real sense that directing a live-action performance is absolutely freeing compared to animation, where every physical action costs time and frames to illustrate. This constant movement helps keep the film's pace feeling aggressive and intensive even when it's just board members speaking to one another. Quick and sudden cuts are often used to convey the chaos felt by those in the middle of this dire and unpredictable situation. Unconventional camera angles are used to reflect upon the emotions felt by the characters as they gaze upon some new revelation. Meanwhile, Higuchi's use of the camera presents shots both traditional to convey the monster's scale, as well as those new and unfamiliar to help understand just how massive a beast we're dealing with. We've seen tanks go up against Godzilla ineffectively before, but now it feels truly ground level, and the invincibility of the beast is far more greatly emphasized as you watch the hotly glowing bullets bounce vainly off of the kaiju's impenetrable hide. From every conceivable angle you could assess the film from, its deeper thematic elements, the unique Japanese perspective on the political and societal landscape of that era, the immensity of the beast and how well he reflects the devastating, fearsome power of that which he represents, or the film's direction and narrative, it is not only a good Godzilla film, it is perhaps the only entry in the 30-some movie franchise history to truly tap into what made Godzilla a success to begin with. I would thus argue that Shin Godzilla is not only a great Godzilla film, but the first since 1954 to deliver a prestigious, resonating experience that could speak to and influence audiences and filmmakers for years to come. This is, honestly, just the beginning of what I'd like to say about the monster of monsters. I plan to do a future video regarding Warner Bros. And Lionsgate Studios' American take on Godzilla from the same guidelines of what makes a good Godzilla film. I also wish to take a close-up look at the Millennium series of films, as they seem like the weirdest mixture of interesting ideas with poor or unusual execution. Finally, I'd like to figure out a way to cover Netflix's animated Godzilla trilogy written by Gen Urobuchi without having to just keep looping trailer footage over and over. That sort of makes this video an establishment of a baseline, I suppose. What I love about Godzilla, what I consider the best of the franchise, and how I approach the rest of the filmography in comparison. I also hope to have done justice to the topics of wa, honne, tatemai, and giri, as I feel a better understanding of these concepts can lead to a better understanding and evaluation of Japanese media as a whole. Lastly, I apologize for this video taking so long to come out. I had hoped to finish it inside of a month, but for a variety of reasons it took longer than anticipated. Special thanks to Post Mesmeric for giving the script a look over. Please be sure to check out his channel and watch his videos and give him a subscription. I do certainly hope to have at least one more video out before the end of the year, so to those of you viewers that patiently wait for each of these projects to trickle on out, thank you. I've dropped Twitter, so it's more important than ever that you not only like and subscribe, but share as well. You can find more of my work at RamblePak64.com, and if you'd like to know about how to access the Discord, feel free to email me at RamblePak64@gmail.com. As always, feel free to comment below. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.